Good morning, everyone, and a very happy new year to each and every one of you. As you can see, we have shifted our services back online for the month of January, and we don't know what's going to happen after that, but for now, we will stay connected online, and we are always available by telephone. I hope you will feel free to call me anytime you feel a need to talk or you just want to hear a human voice or whatever. I'm here and I'm happy to help out in any way that I can. So I hope that 2022 will be a good year for all of us. And regardless of what happens, I hope that we will be able to see God's blessings as well as challenges, because I believe that the blessings usually come within the challenges. And when we face into our challenges, we find untold blessings. It just seems to be how God's people have always worked. I would ask you to just join me for a moment of prayer. Gracious God, as we enter into 2022, we ask that you would bless each and every one of us. We know that there are many things that we've left behind in 2021, and the most painful being that we have said goodbye to some of our trusted congregation members and family members, and for that, we are still grieving. We offer our grief to you, O God, and we ask that as we begin a new year together, that we might see you among us and discern ways that you are working with us. Open our hearts, open our eyes, open our ears, so that we might discern you in this new year, which is unfolding before us. Amen.
Some
I hope that you've all had a very pleasant Christmas and that you've had some time to relax and reflect a little bit. And over these next few days, perhaps you will have an opportunity to reflect a little bit on the Christmas story, as I have been doing myself over the last few days. And I believe in educational circles these days, it's often called debriefing, but debriefing from an event that has happened, processing, thinking it through, wondering how it fits into your life. And as I look back over the Christmas time, I see the importance of dreams, not just dreams that we have that we think, oh, gee, I'd really like to go to, say, Antarctica. I hope that will happen someday. Or the dreams that we have when we're asleep, when we're not really thinking about anything, or we think we're not, but our brains are still working, still processing, still turning over those things that we have been involved in the day. And the reason I bring up this issue of dreams is because the Christmas story, as we understand it, has many, many dreams in it. And in fact, if you look at any of the major stories in both Old and New Testaments, dreams figure quite prominently in those stories. We know that an angel visited Mary. It might have been in a dream, we don't know that, but somehow an otherworldly body visited Mary and said, Mary, you're going to have a child. The child will be the Son of God. And in her perplexment, in her confusion, fear, she came to realize that she could trust God and that no matter what happened, she was going to be okay. And she was going to have this son. And we know that Mary was betrothed to Joseph, meaning she was engaged. She had been promised in marriage. This was a time when women were seen as property and they were promised, as you would promise a livestock or a barn or whatever else. And so Mary had been promised to Joseph. And so when she discovered she was pregnant, Joseph was going to dismiss her. Joseph was going to say, I'm not going to take you as my wife. But then in a dream, he realized that there was no reason to dismiss Mary, that this was the work of God, and that he would be fine, and that the faithful thing to do was to break the taboo of that time and to take Mary as his wife and raise the child that they would have, that Mary was at that point carrying. And so we know the Bethlehem story and the birth of Jesus, not being any room for them in the inn, and so they had to give birth in a stable. And then the part of the story that doesn't happen until about probably 1 or 2 years later, scholars are a little bit divided on just how long it took, before the wise men from the east arrived in Bethlehem. Chances are it might have been longer to 2 years, closer to 2 years, because Herod was the ruler at the time, and Herod was a very vicious, weak leader, and in fact, such a vicious leader that he even had 2 of his own sons killed because he was afraid they would take power from him. And so all this talk about this new king in Bethlehem, Herod was getting very, very frightened about this and wanted to know who it was so that he could eliminate him, so that there was no threat to his power. And we know that he, in fact, had a decree that all boys under the age of 2 had to be rounded up and killed. And so we know that the wise men appeared before this happened, before the first family had to flee as refugees. The wise men arrived, and they had encountered Herod and Herod's people, who had said, after you've been to Bethlehem, come back and tell me about it. And we'll have some quality time, and you can tell us where the child is. So we have a sense that obviously Mary and Joseph and the child were still in Bethlehem, and they hadn't had to flee at that point. And so the wise men, when they arrived and opened up their treasure chests and gave their gifts, their best gifts, they also had a dream. And in that dream, they were warned not to return to Herod, that they should go back to their own home territory on a different route so that they would not encounter Herod. And they might not have known why, because at that point, Herod had not made this decree. But we know that by not telling Herod where the Christ child was, Mary and Joseph and the child were able to escape to Egypt, and then where they lived as refugees for the next 12 years. Well, I want to tell you a little bit. I'm talking about dreams. And I want to tell you a little bit about a dream that I had actually on the 21st of December. So the beginning of the winter season, the winter solstice. And I had the strangest dream. I woke up and then when I got up in the morning, it was very strange, but it wouldn't leave me. I kept thinking about it. And I'll tell you a little bit about it. In this dream, I was supposedly to teach some people how to drive a car. Now, I have never been a driver trainer. That's not something I ever aspired to. In fact, I've never really taught anybody how to drive a car. But in this dream, I was to teach a person how to drive a car, and there were some other people in this so-called car. It was the weirdest looking contraption I'd ever seen. It looked absolutely nothing like a car. And when you teach somebody how to drive a car, you generally have the wheel and somebody beside them. Well, in this dream, there was somebody at the wheel and then somebody directly behind them. And then I woke up and I thought to myself, what's that all about? That's the strangest dream I've ever had, recently anyways. But it wouldn't leave me. And I began to unpack it a little bit. And I realized that the first thing I realized was that instead of being beside the person that I was going to be training to drive this vehicle, I was going to be right behind them. And what better place to be able to teach somebody, because you're seeing exactly what they're seeing. And as I thought about it further, I thought, well, this car, this vehicle, it was sort of like a concrete flatbed. And I thought, I don't even know how this thing will run. It doesn't look like anything I've ever even imagined in science fiction as a car. And there were other people in this so-called vehicle. Well, what were they doing there? Usually when you're teaching someone to drive, you don't have a bunch of passengers. So I carried on the next few days, but this dream kept going over in my mind and I kept thinking about it. And then I realized that it is probably a metaphor for moving forward in this time. We're being called to look at things totally differently. And the things we're looking at look totally different. And so just like in that dream, I had no idea how I was ever going to be a driver trainer. I've never taught somebody how to drive. But the sense that there was this sense with everybody that was in this vehicle, that we didn't know where we were going. We didn't know how we were going to get there. We didn't even really know who was going to be driving or who was going to be instructing or really what was going on at all. But all we knew was that we were going to make it work, that somehow it was okay. And I was completely at peace. Sometimes when you have a dream and you wake up and you're feeling your heart's racing, you feel very upset or very anxious. I didn't have any of that. I just had this sense of peace. And I have to wonder, I really have to wonder if that is God speaking to us, God speaking through my dream, that we don't know what's ahead of us. And we don't know how the things that we're going to be using and the ways that we're going to be moving forward may be totally foreign to us. But it's okay, because we're together and because we're cohesive, and because we know that we're going to find a way forward. And that way forward is simply by trusting in God every step of the way. The first thing I was going to have to learn in that vehicle was, does it have a key? How do we start this thing? And then step by step from there. And we may find ourselves in that situation as we move into 2022. But friends, I feel very energized. I feel very excited about this next year ahead for us. I know we're going to be stretched and challenged and called into territory and wilderness territories, perhaps, that we're not familiar with. But I know it's going to be okay. And I know, ultimately, who the driver trainer is. It's not me. It's God. And God is going to show us the way. And I believe that 100%. And I hope that this week and this month, that you can be letting those so-called off-the-wall, silly, crazy thoughts, just let them sit in your mind. Because it's sometimes out of those dreams, those things that seem to make no sense, that we find our way forward. And so, friends, again, I wish you a very, very prosperous and peaceful year ahead. I know that you will find God. You will find God in the challenges. You'll find God in the opportunities where they come together. Keep your eyes and your ears open. And keep your heart open and soft. And God will visit. And we will look forward. We will offer our best, as we always do. The wise ones offered gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And we sometimes wonder what on earth those gifts were for. But that is in God's hands. And so we offer our gifts. And whatever your gift is, Offer it to God. And by offering it to God, by offering it to one another, you are enriched, and we are all enriched. Thanks be to God. Amen.